Okay. Hullin Kuf Chaf Zayin Amud Aleph. Okay.
Why are you so excited about it?
No, I'm just saying. So we're starting. Yeah. Welcome. What we're doing is the Ein Yaakov, which is the Agadic sections of the Gemara. We basically take interesting ideas, or what I like to think are interesting ideas, and then form a shiur around it where we compare it to other midrashim that are found elsewhere. Try to develop some lumdus around the different midrashim. This week I want to touch on, it's really kind of divided into two parts. The first part is talking about the idea of Ma Rabu Ma'asecha Hashem, where we're all familiar with this pasuk from Tehillim, but to see how that's interpreted in the eyes of Chazal in various kind of ways that they develop it. And the second is around this interesting and bizarre teaching about the chulda, which is a weasel. The context in Hullin, right, as with many of the things we learned in this Masechta, is it's discussing something having to do with kashrut in some way, and then it uses that as a kind of a springboard into Agadah. So here it's discussing different animals that are tameh versus tahor, which the Torah tells us about, and then it uses that to talk about Marabu Masecha Hashem, the different creations, and also the chulda specifically. So let's begin. Hullin Kuf Chav Zayin Amud Aleph. Tana Rabbanan, it was taught. Hatzav Lumineu. So the Torah tells us amongst the groups of animals which are tameh is the tzav, the lizard, and all the various kinds of lizards. What does that come to include? La'avi ha'arud v'chen ha'nefilim v'salamandra. So it comes to include an animal called an arud, a nefilim, and a salamander. The context of the salamander, Rashi talks about this. I didn't bring it here, but basically the belief at the time was that the salamander lived in fire, right? That the salamander used to come out of fire, so it was created by fire. וכשהיה רבי עקיבא מגיע לפסוק זה, אומר מה רבו מעשיך השם. So therefore when Rabbi Akiva came to this idea of the salamandra, he used to say, how great, how wonderful are your deeds, Hashem. יש לך בריות גדולות בים, ויש לך בריות גדולות ביבשה. You created, sea creatures, you created land animals. שבים ילמה לילות ביבשה מיד מתות, and each of them has their habitat, right? If either one of them tries to go into the world of the other one, they won't be able to survive. And similarly, you have animals that were created in fire and animals that were created in the air. Again, the context is the salamandra, which comes from the fire. And similarly, if either one of those two leaves their natural environment and goes to the other one, they wouldn't be able to survive. Rabbi Akiva sees in this diversity and plurality of creation a testament to the incredible nature of Hakadosh Baruch Hu's hand when he created the world. And then just the next line in the Gemara, which is going to be the second half of the shiur. Tana Rabbanan, it was also taught, Kol sheyesh beyabasha yesh bayam, chutz min hachulda. That basically there's a parallel between every type of animal that exists on land to an animal that exists in the sea. The context is not going to go into the halachic context, but you have like certain animals that have a name that on land, and in the sea they're called, like the sea, whatever that animal is, a seahorse, for example, in English. So you have an example of an animal that's paralleled in the ocean to every animal on the land, except for the chulda, except for the weasel, which does not have a parallel in the ocean. Amar Rabbi Zera, Ma'ikra, how do we know this? Ha'azinu kol yoshvei chaled. That there, Yoshvei Chaled means the residents of the earth, but Yoshvei Chaled, it's taken to mean Chulda, which is the weasel, that it only dwells on the earth. So that's the drasha there. Okay, so first let's talk about Marabu Masecha Hashem. So the first thing that Maharsha notes is that Rabbi Akiva isn't by accident comparing land animals to sea animals and animals from the fire to animals from the air. This should ring a bell for us in terms of these specific elements in their significance. And Maharsha says as follows: Zecher b'maaseh Hashem, Zechar b'maaseh Hashem, arba yesodot hapshutim. All right, in that time there was this belief in kind of everything in the world came from four essences: Esh, Ruach, Mayim, Aretz. So you had the fire, wind, water, and earth, and everything had its source in one of those four essences. V'zeh she'amar ki chol nivra minu yesodot elu ena yotzeh mitiv'o. And everything that was created from one of these four elements does not leave its nature. In other words, that's somehow embedded in the nature of that thing. כי הנה יש לך בריות גדלות בים שנבראו מן המים. Okay, so the things that live in the sea, obviously their nature, their essence is water. Kedagim halalu, like fish. V'imolot le'yabasha, if they go onto the land, shua aretz, because land is earth. Kedichtiv vayikra elokim le'yabasha eretz, hu yisod korov l'mayim. So in terms of the element, there's not just that there were four elements, but that they have a certain relationship to each other. So the element that's closest to water is earth. Even in that case, where you go from one element to its closest one, afalpi ken miad metot, right? It can't live outside of its habitat. And similarly in the other way around, where earth cannot go to water. And what is the animals that come from the ur? Juesh, that's fire, right? Which is ruach. מיד מתות, וכן בהפך. והוא מפני שכל נברא מארבע יסודות פשוטים, אינו יוצא מטבעו, וכאמלן. Okay, so Maharsha is just kind of explaining Rabbi Akiva's drasha, right? The broader point, this analysis is not so relevant in terms of what Rabbi Akiva is trying to highlight is that you have a lot of different types of animals and that each of them needs specific circumstances in order to survive and to thrive, and that God created each one with the ability to live in its particular habitat. But Maharsha is tying it to kind of the broader context of creation. Okay. The Tanchumei Lamdenu teaches the same idea that's taught in the name of Rabbi Akiva, but it quotes it in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, which is one of his students, and it adds something. Amar Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, yesh lecha בריות שהן גדולות בים ואינן גדולות ביבשה. גדולות ביבשה ואינן גדולות בים. ואם יעלו אותן שבים ליבשה, אין להם חיים. ואם ירדו אותן שביבשה לים, אין להם חיים. Same thing that we saw. ויונה ירד לים וחיה. שנאמר, ויסעו את יונה ויטילו אל הים. והדג עלה ליבשה וחיה. שנאמר, ויאמר השם לדג ויכה את יונה אל היבשה. Okay, so he adds that there are exceptions. In other words, in the story of Yonah went from the land into the sea and survived, even though he was from the Adamah. And the fish, the way he interprets the pasuk, it's not necessarily clear. The pasuk says Hashem said to the fish, and the fish vomited Yonah onto the land. So the way I always understood that is that the fish went to shallow water and vomited him out. But here Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is interpreting it to mean no, the fish actually went on land outside of the area where it normally survives and was able to survive. And
Isn't a whale?
Dog, could be that it was a whale. I don't know if dog is.
It comes out of water.
I think because whales are mammals, they don't breathe in water; they breathe air, like a little man, technically.
Yeah, okay. I mean, you still can't live on the land, right? I guess in theory you could. Beached whale.
If it's fed by,
You could just survive on land.
I don't know.
I thought it was its own.
wet.
Yeah, I'm
Stay
pretty
wet?
sure it'll get like sunburned.
Oh, okay.
It's like a bit of both, but isn't it? I thought it was meant to talk about its own fish, like it was made. This fish was made specifically for Yonah, no?
Yeah, I've heard that idea as well. Yeah.
It might not be a species. That's like another.
Yeah, remember it has to have oxygen in its stomach so that it can breathe.
This is not a normal fish.
It's a special whale.
Right. In any event, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is highlighting that. I think the point he's adding to what Rabbi Akiva said is Rabbi Akiva's whole point is nature was created in this way where everyone has its place and there's kind of a beauty to that that aspect of creation, that every creation has its place, and if it steps outside of that place, then it can't thrive or survive. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is adding, but there are exceptions when it involves, and this is how I understand this, when it involves Yonah, who's a Navi of Hashem. In other words, yes, there's beauty in the way that everything is kind of set up and that there's a natural order to things and that there's opposites and they parallel each other and that everything kind of is in balance. But also, don't forget that HaKadosh Baruch Hu can come in and kind of insert himself into that balance and that it's not something that is outside of his control. That's how I understand this addition of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and what he's trying to kind of clarify and caveat what Rabbi Akiva said. But it could be that it means something else. In Tana de Eliyahu, and this actually I find to be a rather, on a personal level, a rather actual beautiful idea. The Tana de Eliyahu takes this concept of Marabu Masecha Hashem and applies it similarly to Rabbi Akiva, but in a way that I find a bit more compelling. Davar acher, ma gadlu Masecha Hashem. Okay, that's from a different parak of Tehillim. It's the same idea. Bo ra'eh kama minei be'emot u'minei chayot u'minei ofot yesh ba'olam. Come and see how many different types of animals and birds and there are in the world. And how many different fish there are in the world. קולו של זה דומה לזה, או מראה שזה דומה לזה, או שמא דעתו של זה דומה לזה, או שמא טעמו של זה דומה לזה. Are any two animals, do they have the same voice? Do they sound the same? Do they look the same? Do they have the same instinct or intellect? Do they have the same taste? לא קול, ולא מראה, ולא דעה, ולא טעם של זה דומה לזה. Every type of animal is different from every other type of animal. וכך שאלו חכמים, and our rabbis taught us במשנה, להגיד גדולתו של מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא, that creation is a testament to the greatness of Hashem. שאדם תובע כמה מטבעות בחותם אחד, וכולם דומות זה לזה. That when a king already has a signet on his ring, he creates kind of an imprint. They all look identical. Right? ומלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא טבע את כל אדם בחותמו של אדם הראשון, ואין אחד דומה לחברו. Every single person looks entirely different from every other person. וכך נאמר, מה גדלו מעשיך השם. And the idea that you have, on the one hand, a species where everybody has certain similarities, but on the other hand, every member of that species is inherently different from the other member. Tam de Belial sees in that a certain beauty and greatness in Hashem and His creation. And I think that that's a beautiful idea that we find is rooted even in Tehillim.
It's weird that he only sees the beauty in like the individuals inside of a species with humans. The guy, he said two crows are talking the exact same thing. There's no beauty in the fact that
They're not very different.
I don't know. Crows would look at each other, I think, and be like, man.
Can you tell the difference between the two pigeons on your windowsill?
Some of them you can. With crows, they did the whole thing. Crows know the difference between humans 100%, and humans.
And I remember them for years.
Yeah, humans can't do it. It's like a little human centric.
You only know what you can perceive.
I hear that.
You're getting into there was a paper that was published. What is it like to be a bat? Right, it's a question in hard consciousness. Not to go off topic here. We have no idea what it is to feel like a raven or a crow or anything. We just have no concept of what that experience is like.
That we don't even understand. Like,
yeah,
a different type of sense.
Yeah. So it's hard to know what it's like to be a crow. But your point is a valid one. It's a good insight. He does seem to be highlighting the difference of every person versus the difference between species of animals versus individual animals.
He's familiar with it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it conflicts with saying, and also every individual animal is unique. He's just less focused on that compared to the difference between every person. But it's a fair ha'ara. Good. There's a different usage, and this is, I think, a bit humorous, actually. A different usage of Marabu Masecha Hashem in this Gemara in Avodah Zarah Daf Chaf Amud Aleph. Davar acher lo tichanem lo titen lahem chen. There's this teaching that when it comes to relationships with goyim, with Gentiles, so you shouldn't show them any favor. Okay? M'sai leil Rav, da'amar Rav asur la'adam she'omar kama na'a avodat kochavim zu. That this is a support for Rav, who has a statement. He says, a person is not allowed to say, how beautiful is that non-Jewish woman? Meitve, a contradiction. Ma'aseh b'Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, shaya al gabei ma'ala b'har habayit, u'ra'a avodat kochavim achat, na'a, biyoter, ve'amar ma'rabu ma'asecha Hashem. Okay, so Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, one time he was on Har Habayit, he saw a beautiful non-Jewish woman, an exceedingly beautiful non-Jewish woman, and he said, ma'rabu ma'asecha Hashem. First of all, I think that's just a hilarious teaching. That's a great braita. No, that would not work today, I don't think. But doesn't that contradict the teaching of Rav, who says you're not allowed to compliment, you're not allowed to say kamana avodah kochavim zeh. Ve'af Rabbi Akiva, and this one's even better. Rabbi Akiva ra'a eshet Turnus Rufus harasha. Turnus Rufus was a Roman governor general. So Rabbi Akiva saw his wife. Rak shachak ubacha. He spit. Rak sichek ubacha. He spit, laughed, and cried. Okay. Rak sha'eta ba'amiti pasrucha. No, she obviously was very beautiful, so he spit to kind of make the point that she came from nothingness, right? Sachak, he laughed. Da'atida demegayra u'nesivla, because he knew that she was destined to convert and marry him, so he thought that was funny. Ubacha, and then he cried, "Hai shufra bli afra," right? That in the end she would return back to the dust from which she came. So he has this series of emotions, but part of this is this idea that he acknowledged through his laughter her beauty, or acknowledged the fact that she was exceedingly beautiful.
Why did she land up converting and marrying him? That's a bit of a
where's the rest of the
fantastical story. You can't just skip over that part.
Maybe that's in a different midrash. It's not brought here in particular, but all right, I'll look into that. It's a good point. The story of Rabbi Akiva marrying Tunis Rufus' wife. I assume it's probably recorded somewhere. I'll look it up. Okay, the Rav, and so the Gemara says, okay, so going back to the original question, Rav said a person's not allowed to say Kama na'avodaka chavimzu, and here we have Rabbi Shimon Gamliel going around and saying Marabu Masecha Hashem when he sees these beautiful women walking around. So the answer is Aduyehu de Kamode. Da'amar ma haroa Briot Tovot Omer Baruch Shekacha bara ba'olamo. That Rabbi Shimon Gamliel was not saying this, how beautiful is this woman. He was saying how beautiful is creation. In other words, he saw something beautiful and used that to reflect on the beauty of creation as a whole, and wasn't focused specifically on that particular woman's beauty. You're shaking your head.
He's like, I'm not about you, just in general.
No, he's saying Agreed Hashem. He made something super.
Right.
No, but
I'm
he's not saying specifically this. He's saying he happened to say it then. Just
he saw the woman and saw in that the beauty of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's like a creative ability versus her being beautiful.
No, it's like a reminder, like when you hear about somebody that it's really good. Wow. When are you going to see it? You're going to see it when you get a haircut. Oh, this guy is such a good barber, but how do you know? You didn't see him with a haircut. So he sees something pretty. So you think,
I hear it just sounds like a cop out that he just doesn't want to say that he's saying about her specifically.
Kitzer, that's that Gemara. Okay. And one final thought on this idea of Marabu Masech Hashem is a teaching in Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, where this pasuk is said in Tehillim, but really in the Midrash, the first person who actually said it was none other than Adam Rishon. Okay. Amad Adam v'ayam istakel klape ma'ala v'mata. So you imagine Adam Rishon is created, and he's kind of described in the Midrash as almost being this innocent. Like he looks out at the world, he doesn't know what to make of the world. He's like a baby coming into the world for the first time, trying to make sense of it all. So he looks around, and he saw all the animals that God created, and he was astonished. And he began to praise Hashem over the diversity of animals. He stood up. His appearance was the appearance of a god. He was, he had the dimensions that he spanned the entire world. And all these animals saw him and they were afraid of him because he was so mighty. They came and bowed before him. But the basic idea here is that Adam HaRishon, even he saw in the diversity of animals in creation this idea of Marabu Masech Hashem. So we kind of saw how this pasuk in Tehillim, right, which of course is in a mizmor that talks about all these different animals, right? The Barchi Nafshet Hashem. So they use that to really reflect. It's not saying, oh, I see the beauty in Hashem because he gave me whatever. It's looking at nature and reflecting on nature and seeing in just the world around you, almost kind of this natural appreciation for Hashem, and that's something that very much has its as a source in these midrashim. Okay, pivoting now to the second half of the Gemara that we saw, which is about the chulda, right, the weasel, and here we'll get a bit more into kind of the mefarshim on the Gemara and on the in Yaakov and stuff like that. So. We saw that it said there's no parallel for the chulda, for the weasel in the sea. The Yerushalmi elaborates on this. Right? It says, hear nations and give an ear all inhabitants of the earth. Rabbi Acha v'Rabbi Abau. Rabbi Abau v'Rabbanan. Okay, so Chadamar, one of them said, Lama hu moshel kol ba'ei olam b'chulda. Why is there a comparison between all the nations of the world and a weasel? אלא לפי שכל מה שיש ביבשה יש בים, הרבה מינים בים, מה שאין ביבשה, ואין חולדה בים. Okay, so the first teaching is what we saw in the Bavli, that all animals have a parallel between the aversion on the earth and in the sea, except for the chulda. Okay, v'chorana amar, but the second drasha, lamu moshel kol ba'olam b'chulda, why is the whole world compared to a weasel? Ela ma chulda zo goreret umanachat, ve'ena yodat l'mi hi munachat, just as a weasel, I guess, finds food and drags it and leaves it somewhere and doesn't know who they're leaving it for. I guess the weasel, they come and they take things and they drag them to other places, even though they're not necessarily aware of why they're doing it or who they're doing it for. Kachen kol ba'ei olam. Similarly, all the people in the world, gorin umanichin, ve'enan yodim l'mi hen manichim. That I think this is like a critique of human kind of nature, that we go about our lives and try to convince ourselves that what we're doing is important, but we don't really know what it's all about or what it's for. I think that's what that means. Yitzbor v'lo yadam yosfam. This is a pasuk, right? That we work so hard to gather and to build things, but we don't even know who we're doing it for or why we're doing it. So in that sense, right, humanity is compared to a weasel who acts in that way as well. So that's the Yerushalmi in terms of understanding that pasuk in a different way from the Gemara that we saw understands it. The Maharsha has an interesting insight that this pasuk of Shimu Zol Kol Amim Hazinu Kol Yoshvei Chaled is Tehillim Perek Memtet, and that Mizmor deals with at the end of the Mizmor it talks about how Al Tira Ki Ashir Ish Ki Yarbeh Kavod Beito, like a person should not be afraid when he sees someone else being wealthy. Because that person won't be able to take their wealth with them when they die. In other words, you shouldn't be jealous or look towards other people who've amassed a lot of wealth, because it's not worth anything. Once they pass on, then that wealth's not going anywhere with them. And that's kind of the theme of the end of that Zemer, is just about how, that there's kind of a certain futility to what we're doing in this world. So dimata adam lechulda, right? So it compares a person to a weasel, b'mizmor hazeh, lefi shezachar sham, because that Zemer of Tehillim talks about a person should not feel secure in his wealth or take any comfort in his wealth. The Maharsha connects it to our Gemara, right? That the Chulda is the only animal that lives only on the earth, not in the sea. So the idea is to say that a person should not feel that he has any sort of comfort in his wealth, because a person, like a weasel, lives only on land. Those are the only two things that are only on land. And when the world gets flooded, hamin kulo v'grahu mikol shar ba'alei chayim shenishar mehat minan bayam. Okay, Vayin b'Yerushalmi. As the Maharsha says, right, if a flood comes and wipes out everybody, all the animals on the land, but their parallel species in the ocean will survive. And the only exceptions to the Chulda, because we learned it doesn't have any parallel in the ocean, and people. And so that ties to the end of that Zemer of Tehillim, which says a person should not take comfort in his wealth. There's kind of this larger point of how futile. He doesn't have a backup plan. Like, his life is very futile. So you shouldn't kind of take comfort in any of the things that he amasses, because if a catastrophe strikes, he doesn't have a parallel in the ocean to still rely on.
There's a weird Rashi somewhere that talks about mermaids. That's like a half human, half fish.
Okay.
What?
There might be some sort of parallel there, but it's not meant to be like a human.
How did you see it?
There's a Rashi. I can find it also. It says Chetzi min Adam v'Chetzi min Dag or something like that.
Okay.
Chetzi tzoras Adam v'Chetzi tzoras Dag.
Interesting.
Isn't there an animal, manatee or something that they say that's what people used to think were mermaids from afar, because it looks human-like?
I mean, Rashi's not necessarily saying that there was a half human.
I think there's an Nizu rabbi from Beit Shemesh or Slifkin. So he talks about all these different animals in the Torah and the Talmud, and then kind of goes through it. So I think he talks about a mermaid as well. But
Well, anyway, it's not like, I don't think it's meant to say that it's like a substitute, like a C version of a person. It's not. It isn't like a.
right.
What do you have against mermaids?
Yeah, if you find that Rashi, let me know. I'd be interested. But yes, I guess it is interesting that this particular teaching doesn't mention that at all. Right? It says everyone is land and parallel in the sea, except for the Yehuda. Okay. All right. In the last 5 minutes, we'll just finish up these sources. I want to get to the Iyun Yaakov at the end. So Yad Yosef, he just notes almost a grammatical point that if you see where it says Dalid in the Yad Yosef, about halfway down, on the left side it says Dalid. So he says Lefi shelo yimtza lashon cheled zulati zikna. That generally this root of kiwazin kol yoshvei chaled, so cheled usually is in the context of weakness and old age, infirmity. Kmo mamtin michaled. V'hu milashon chaluda. which is rust, right? Rust in Hebrew is chaluda. The idea is something that's frail, that's old, that's rusty. When something gets old, chaluda, right? It becomes rusty. Now, he's trying to explain where the Gemara felt it had the license to interpret Hazinu Kol Yoshvei Chaled to be a reference to the weasel, to give this interpretation, because Yoshvei Chaled, since Chulda usually in the normal context has to do with rust or getting old, you can't apply that to the earth. So therefore, Yoshvei Chaled, it says, okay, I can use it to understand it to mean Yoshvei Chulda, like to teach me about Chulda. Okay. I want to learn this Gemara in Sanhedrin, and then we will learn the Yaakov who uses it to kind of tie everything together. So the Gemara in Sanhedrin of Chavtet Amud Bet teaches the following: There was a man, a miser, who was very stingy. They used to call him the mouse that lies on dinars, because he was somebody who just like sat on his money. Right, that was his name that they gave him. Kika shachiv, when he was on his deathbed, Amar planya uplanya masku bezuze, and he said when he died, okay, this person and this person, they owe me money, or I owe them money. Sorry. Bata de shachiv, when he passed away, atu tavinu liyoshin, so people came to sue his children for the money. Atu lekam Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, they came for Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi. Amar lehu ki amrinan adam asui shelo leashpia et atzmo hani mile michayim aval leachar mita lo. And so it's talking about when we trust people when they make certain statements, and when we say that they may have an incentive not to be telling the truth. So we have this idea that the person is not going to. We have this idea that the person will not deliberately. What's it called? What's the word I'm looking for? Incriminate himself. So when we have that principle, that's only when the person's alive. But if a person's about to pass away, so then we might think that that principle does not apply, that there is a reason to think he'll tell the truth, even if he's incriminating himself because he knows he's about to die and he wants to, come clean. And therefore, when he said, I owe such and such people money, we should attribute truth to that, and therefore the people who are coming to sue should get that amount of money from the descendants. Okay, paru palga. So the descendants paid back half of it, not the whole thing. Tavinu ledina liidach palba. So then the people came and said, we want the other half. So they brought them to court again for the second half. Atu l'kaimi de Rabbi Chia, and they came before a different rabbi. Amar lahu, Rabbi Chia said, Kashem she'adam asur shelo yashbi'at atzmo. So he said, just as a person will not incriminate themselves, kach adam asur shelo yashbi'at banav. So he said, yeah, it's true that this guy was about to die, but he knew that what he said would affect his descendants, and a person cares about, even in their final moments, they care about the well-being of their children, so we shouldn't assume they will say something to incriminate even the descendants. So Amrule Nizil v'nihader. So he said, so then they should give back the first half, right? In other words, if the teaching is that they shouldn't have paid it to begin with, the half, so that should all go back. Amar Huk for Horazakin. They said, well, no, that was already ruled in the court of Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yossi, you can't get it back. So they ended up having contradicting teachings, and the fact that they withheld half of the payment ended up working out for them. Just an interesting Gemara there. The point that I want to kind of highlight, and what the Yaakov takes, is this bitui of Achbara de Shachiva Dinari, the mouse that sits on dinar. So Rashi, in his explanation, means Ashir Shelo Ne'anem Yimanono, that the focus is that he's rich and he himself is not gaining any benefit. Right? Right, the mouse that sits on the coins, so it's not that he gains from the fact that he's just sitting on these coins. They don't help him at all. So he's just stam holding on to them, right? It's this kind of miserly attribute of thinking that there's value in them and not being willing to give them to people, but not gaining from them yourself. So just to kind of conclude, so the Yun Yaakov, in that first screenshot, it's on the right side where it says Chutz in big letters. The Yun Yaakov is the first one on the top, and then all the way to the right, the third line. It says Chutz min hachulda. Amar Bizeira Maikra Azim Kol Shvei Chaled. So the Yun Yaakov says, Hamamar hazeh ita gam ken b'Yerushalmi b'Shabbat, Perek Shmona Shratzim. We saw that, right? V'ita od sham v'charina amar lama hu mamshil kol ha'olam l'chuda ma chuda zo goreret u'minachat ve'ena yodat l'mi monachat kach kol ba'olam goreinu manichim v'enan din l'mi manichim. Ad kan, right? We saw that in the Yerushalmi that there was a second interpretation that the world is compared to a chuda because both of them, right, they're taking things, places, and building up inventory and trying to make a name for themselves without really knowing why they do it or who they do it for. Okay. And now the Inu Yaakov is saying, okay, so the Yerushalmi had two drashot. One was the one we just mentioned, and one was the one from the Bavli that it teaches me that a chulda does not have a parallel in the sea. Okay? So the Inu Yaakov says both of these ideas, Yesh lomar hatam shebeperek shira. So there's a midrash called Perek Shira, which is a relatively late midrash. I think it's from the period of the Geonim, where basically every creation or every animal is given a perek, and it's just praise to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it says, the Tzfardea sang, and then it's this kind of perek of praises for Hashem in the name of the Tzfardea. And the birds sang, and then this and that. And then so every animal...
Poop.
Sorry?
The dog's poop. Because that's what the tanners use for the hide.
Okay. So it's in there
I think that's the praise of the dog in Perek Shira.
Okay.
That's why they go around Kamigat.
But that's why they're not allowed to be counted for a minion.
Who? The Kanas?
Yeah.
They smell a poop. Nice.
Shkor. Good. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so maybe so the dogs also have a perek of praise. And thank you for sharing.
The Kiryat Gat dogs especially.
I thought that smell in the evenings is from cows.
No, that's
nearby.
one thing, but people leave it.
They leave there. Okay. Got it. Where were we? Okay, so the chulda also has a perek in Perek Shira. Okay, the weasel. Omeret, what does the chulda say? Kol neshama tehalevha. Okay, which we're all familiar with that pasuk. Every soul, every creature shall praise Hashem. So why is that the chulda's song? What is the connection between a weasel and that concept? Lefi Tam Rishon, according to the first drasha, shechulda eina mitzliya bayam rach bayabasha. Right, the first drasha was that the weasel only lives on land, not in the sea. It's the only animal like that. Okay, rach bayabasha. V'chol ma sheyesh bayabasha yesh bo nitzotz neshama. So then Yaakov is saying, because only animals have a spark of a neshama, right? That people have a full neshama, animals have a spark of a neshama. Kedichtiv b'Parshat Noach, it says in regards to the flood, Kol asher nishmat ruach chayim ba'apo, mikol asher b'charav v'ametu. Right? That everything which had a nishmat ruach chayim, every living creature on earth perished in the flood. Uvedarshinan, and the drasha from there, mina v'lo dagim shebayam. Right? We know the fish survived the flood because they were in the ocean. So the idea is that the fish don't have a neshama. Okay? They don't even have this spark of a soul, but there's something that animals have which separates them from fish, this idea of a neshama that unites them with people. That's why we don't do shechita on fish, exactly. That there's this idea that fish are somehow inferior to animals. Animals have something that requires some purification as part of the shechting process because of their neshama. Lekach omeret kol neshama tehaliyah. So Yaakov is trying to tie this pasuk in Perek Shira with our teaching around the chulda here. So he says that's the first drasha we saw by the chulda, that it's only on land. That ties to kol neshama tehaliyah, because the chulda is saying, I'm only on land, so kol neshama tehaliyah, I'm not in the sea. So I'm not relating to the animals in the sea. That's one. Ulu lashon sheni, and according to the second language, kevan shehu gorer umeniach lacherim, ve'ene yodea lemi meniach, since the chulda drags its food and it doesn't know for who it leaves the food, lekach ne'emar kol neshama tehaliyah. So that's why he says every soul shall praise Hashem. Because he's dragging around food and leaving it for anyone. So the chulda is saying, everyone can come take the food that I dragged around because I don't know who it's for. So he's saying everyone should praise Hashem because he's trying. So right, v'kevan shechulda osef akol begezel. And the weasel, when it goes and takes stuff and moves it to other places, it doesn't do that with permission, right? It steals it. Ve'eno yodea lemi yosef. He takes it from one person, doesn't know who he steals it from, doesn't know who he's giving it to. Kilatzmo en bo hana'ah. And he himself, according to Yaakov, doesn't benefit from this. This is just his instinct, his nature, the chulda. But it's not as though he gains from the fact that he takes stuff from one place and puts it in another place. And similarly with mice, that they also have this kind of reputation for taking things and hoarding them, even though it doesn't benefit them in any way. As we saw, the mouse that sits on the dinars, she'eino ne'aneh, right? And he doesn't benefit, u'me'aneh, and he doesn't give it to others to benefit, l'shum adam. Right, skipping down to the third on the right side. Rak she'shachav adinarim. He just sat on the money. Lachein yesh remez batorah. And so the Yaakov says, and there's a hint to this idea. What? V'zel lachem hatameh. It's talking about the animals which are impure. These are the animals which are impure. Hacholed va'achbar. The first two in the list of the impure insects or animals are the weasel and the mouse. Kilomar mish yesh lo shnei simanim elu. These two signs. Kmo hacholed va'achbar. Shelochrim mishel acherim. They take from others to steal. Le'asof mamon, and they take things from others. Ve'enam ne'enim ve'enam me'enim zeh. Siman tameh. Right? They don't benefit and they don't let others benefit. This is v'zeh hatameh lachem. In other words, it's tying it back to what it said in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, right? Why is achabar the shechavi dinari? Right, a person who's a miser and hoards all the money for themselves, it's a sign of tumah that a person does that, because it compares them to a chuda and it compares them to an achbar, that they hoard things for themselves, they don't give it to anybody else, and that is how we're meant to understand the idea of the chuda and the achbar. So, just to kind of wrap it up, I mean, we're over time, but we saw, right, there's two ideas of kol marabu masecha, Hashem seeing the beauty in nature, and then recognizing that there's animals like the chuda, and trying to derive from the chuda these kind of these ethical messages for us in terms of how you're supposed to, first of all, be giving with your money and not be a miser, and similar the teaching to the achbar. It's done right now, and yeah, that's it.
Did you find it? Midrash?
Yeah, because
Did you actually find it?
it's not Medrash, it's Rashi, but
Did you find it?
You could probably think of Bukhara, it's Chesam Adalef, but most of the explanations online are what they were saying in manatee or dolphin.
In terms of the mermaid.
Yeah. As in Rashi might have believed it. He might have thought they were mermaids then, but what the Gemara is talking about is not.
Okay.
The Gemara is talking about either a dolphin or a manatee.
I like a dolphin more. Reemergent, a lot smarter.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, if I'm gonna upgrade one animal, definitely.
Go for it.
I feel like you'd have to.